Welcome to the Strength Coach Experience podcast. I'm your host, Joe Lego, and here we go. All right, welcome everyone to the Strength Coach Experience episode 17. Today I want to welcome Nathan Todd. He is the Chief Eradicating Officer of No Labels Defines Me Coaching. A little background, Nathan is actually the first podcast that I was ever on and actually helped me a little bit, inspired me to start doing this. So I'm always grateful for him to do that, and also want to return the favor by having him on my show. And we'll dive right into things. Nathan, man, thank you for coming on, man. It's been a little bit, but I'm happy we could get on here and have a nice conversation.
Yeah, man. Last time we were talking, you were in Florida, so
exactly
things have changed, man.
Yeah, back in New York, and we were just talking. It's 29 degrees outside.
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity, and I'm excited to see where our conversation takes us.
Exactly. That's the best part of the podcast, right? See what direction we go and where we end up. So why don't we go, right into things? Why don't we start with a little bit of background about you, and then we'll go on from there.
Yeah, man. So for anybody who sees this when it goes up on the YouTube, you can't see my shirt, but my shirt actually says 4 pounds, 10 ounces. And that's been something that's been really kind of important to me at this point in my story. So 4 pounds, 10 ounces, what that means is I was born 8 weeks premature and given a 50-50 shot to live. And it wasn't until I was 2 years old that I actually received the diagnosis that I was born with cerebral palsy. It's pretty interesting because my mom, for both me and my brother, up until we were about 18 years old, she wrote letters to us on our birthday and gave it to us when we were 18. And when we're 18, we were like, well, this is fucking, I don't really want these letters. Like, that's not a cool present. But during this time, when we've had nothing to do, we've all been stuck inside, kind of pulled those letters out. And it's interesting to read the early on letters, because there's one right after I was born, and it says, man, Nathan looked pitiful. He had tubes coming out every which way. He was so tiny, and he was on a heating bed, and I was on a respirator. And to see that in writing is pretty interesting, because, all this stuff happens to us. And at that point, we don't realize that it happened, but it really happened. And so that's kind of inspired my journey with labels. Because, when you're born with cerebral palsy or any type of disability, you get all these projected labels from the minute you come out into the world. And for the most part, in society's view, they're all leading with all the things you can't do. And so my whole life has been, okay, let's figure out what I can do. Let's figure out how far I can push this thing. And let's bring people along for the ride and teach them and model for them that they can do it too.
That's an awesome message, man. And for those of you who don't know, I also was born with cerebral palsy like Nathan, born early. And I think it's very interesting what you brought up with the tubes. That's been something I honestly, being home, have realized too throughout the years, because you see the pictures of yourself, right? And you don't know, but you start to talk to your parents a little bit and realize what they actually went through, because you don't, you're 6 months old, so you don't really understand what's going on. But then you start to see those pictures, you see those things, and you really kind of get a sense of what it was like, kind of worrying every single day, about you and about your well-being. I had the tubes and the incubators as well, man. And, and it's just one of those things where, everything you go through, as you said, is something that builds you up. But I think it's fantastic, what you're doing, and trying to crush those labels, because, in my experience also, most people don't even know what we have. I mean, even when I was younger, and I'm sure you've dealt with it now, you see a lot of people that are younger, in wheelchairs, or have issues with mobility, and you think they were in a car accident or some other anomaly. And it's not until you start to talk to people that you realize they kind of have a similar thing going on. And it's a whole kind of different thing where, it affects everybody different. You can't really explain it in one way. And it's kind of a thing where, in order to understand, just in my experiences, you have to really explain to somebody. It takes 10 to 15 minutes. It's not a drive-by comment, if you will. So that's an amazing story, man. And again, I just love what you're doing, and love the message.
And it's interesting with our cerebral palsy, right? As you said, you can look at both of us. We have the same disability, but it impacts each and every one of us completely differently. And I think what I've found over time is one of the most surprising things to people, like, because it's such a visible thing for a
Mhm.
lot of people, they don't realize that it's really just a brain injury. And I think even as people with cerebral palsy ourselves, it takes a minute. It takes a minute to be able to even grasp that that's really what's going on sometimes. Because I see a lot of young kids who have it and they don't really understand that either. They're like, oh, this is just a physical thing. Well, it is physical, but it's actually developmental. Um,
Yeah, we're constantly fighting with our brains, and I think that's a great thing you brought up. And I just want to touch, for anybody out there listening that doesn't know what cerebral palsy is. Cerebral palsy is generally defined. It's a brain uh, injury, if you will, that happens mainly. 85% of people that are premature usually end up with this disability. And what happens is, during the birthing process, your brain is cut off from oxygen, and what happens is the developmental, either cognitive or motor skills of the left or right hemisphere, or both, become affected. And it can range from, both of your legs in one arm, one half of your body, which is called hemiplegia, which is what I have, both legs, whereas quadriplegia, or it can range in a kind of a mixture of those two. And also it can affect um, cognitive function as well, brain processing and different things. It all depends on what side of the brain, left or the right or both, that it affects. And it also, as me and Nathan will talk about, and we've been touching on, it's so vast, because you can look at us, and our conditions are the completely different if you saw us, standing next to each other. But I actually was born, earlier than Nathan, and it affects everybody a lot differently. And there's a lot of things that go into it. So just for everybody out there, just want to clear that up. It is neuromuscular. It's all neuromuscular, and it's all affected based on how much oxygen is received or isn't received during the time in the womb and during birth. And that's how it works. And it affects so many things in such different ways, and there's so many variances. But it's just something that has to be brought up, and just something that can be more understood.
yeah.
Of course. So growing up with CP, let's get in a little bit. How just explain that a little bit. Some of the things you went through, from an early age. I know with you, we've talked before about how yours wasn't really diagnosed until you got a little older. Just some of the things you had to go through, and kind of growing up at an early age, dealing with those things.
Yeah. So, number one thing that I remember anything about was had a surgery called a selective dorsal rhizotomy, which is they go and they cut rootlets in your spine. So they cut the nerve endings to help release some of that spasticity. And the thing that I remember most about that is it was during Christmas time,
Mhm.
and they had a guy come dressed up as Santa Claus, and he picked me up, and all I remember is wanting my dad. Like, I was like, no, what are you doing? I want my dad. Like, that's all I remember. but my legs were so tight that they were crossed,
Okay.
like completely crossed. So without that surgery, I would not be able to walk at all. And at this point, I'm still ambulatory. I use the wheelchair more than I used to as a kid because I'm getting older,
Hmm.
and trying to maintain mobility and flexibility is a daily battle. Uh, but the other thing that taught me at an early age was, in order to even have the surgery, my mom and my dad had to fight to get it paid for through insurance. And she actually had to go to the state legislature to fight to get it approved. And she was able to accomplish that. And through her advocacy and her using her voice, she was able to get that paid for every kid who followed
Oh, wow.
that had the same procedure done. And I think at an early age, I got taught the importance of using your voice to fight for what you believe you should have. Um, because along with that, I was also a March of Dimes ambassador around the same time. And so I would go and give speeches to um, organizations and middle schools and talk about why the March of Dimes and helping prevent premature births was so important. Um, and then it was just like every other kid growing up, I imagine, like you want the same things
Hmm.
and you figure out how to make it happen the way that it works for you. One of the funniest stories that my mom tells is, I've got a younger brother who's 3.5 years younger than me. And so I had the surgery. I was now learning to walk because I didn't learn to walk until I was 4. And so my brother is learning to walk at the same exact time. And he's like, "Oh, let's go play." And we were at a park and it had a huge hill. And my mom was trying to explain, your brother can't make it down the hill. And she's like, he said, "Oh, don't worry, I'll help him." And so you got you got this little baby helping this 4-year-old try and go down a hill. She said we made it like 2 steps and then it was all over. We just started rolling. Um, but yeah, growing up, man, my life was pretty normal, and my parents, they recognized that yes, I have this circumstance, but it's not going away, and eventually they're not going to be here. So they had to equip me with the skills to be able to navigate the world the best that they know how, until I grew up, man.
Yeah, I think that's, a big thing. And I same thing with me. My parents did the same thing. Everything was pretty normal. It was different to kind of go through certain things. But they taught you how to, everything was normal, if you will, right? If there was an issue with a sport, or doing something, we would just kind of figure it out, and there was really no, oh, you can't do this because of, you have this
Yeah.
this certain thing. And especially, me and you are similar in age. I think too, from back then to now, I mean, the advancements are insane. I mean, I trained a kid a few years ago who's 5, had hemiplegia of the left side like I did. And when I went to talk to his physical therapist, the stuff that they do now is fantastic. I mean, I don't know about you, but I mean, I got my hamstring stretched and people used to yell at me to put my foot down. And that was about it. There wasn't really a lot going on. And just to touch on something you talked about before, for everybody that doesn't know, also ataxia is when your muscles they lock in a position, and they're shortened, so they're not able to move because your brain is kind of stuck in that concentric phase in terms of exercise, and they won't relax. So a lot of times what has to happen in severe cases like Nathan, you have to go in, you have to actually clip the muscle or manipulate the nerves so that the arm or the joint or the leg, whatever's affected, it can affect everything. So that can be kind of released so that you can move in a relatively normal range of motion. So I just want to touch on that. But yeah, man, going back on that, I think that's amazing. The March of Dimes stuff, and like I said, I think things are starting to move because when we were younger, man, there was nothing. I mean, I didn't even know what I had. I mean, I used to get stretched and there wasn't a thing. I mean, I knew I had something, but I didn't really understand. Actually, when I was in college, I gave a speech about it, right? And I did, I didn't know, but it was kind of like a presentation. I talked about the disease. I described all the bad parts and the good parts, and then I said I had it, and people started like tearing up, and I'm like, wait, it's okay, But I think there's what you're doing is amazing because that awareness, because a lot of people, oh, it's a brain thing. Oh, but you're fine. You're breathing. You're fine. You can talk. Everything's great. But one of the things that I think we'll get into is that because we're kind of on the cusp of there, doesn't look that serious from the outside. I think that's what affects us. And I think that's what you're fighting against. The other thing is, and, we'll get into this, but the orthopedic side, the breakdown of the hips, the different things in terms of joint articulation where they break down, but it is not covered by those insurance companies. And you and I both know, right? We've talked about your hips before. And one of the things with me is, I feel like, at 40, 50 years old, I think there'll be some issues with the back and some different things, and they're not covered, so I think that's something to touch on. Moving forward, though, I just want to talk about how did you get into, kind of fitness, and how has that kind of changed your kind of outlook and your ability to kind of function on a daily basis?
So I think it's always been something that's been a part of my life, even on the periphery. So my dad was a high school football coach, and he actually made it all the way to try out for the Atlanta Falcons back in the day. So I come from a family of athletic people, and I was surrounded by sports my whole life. And so it was something that I wanted to do, but honestly, it was one of those things where I wasn't sure how to make it happen. And it started to become one of those things like, I don't know if it will be for me. Like I remember the first time I ever went into a gym and tried to lift weights. Dude, when I remember getting under the bench and my hips were so tight, my legs weren't touching the floor. And so it was like, well, how in the hell are we going to make this happen? And at that point, we just quit. And I was like, I don't know if this is going to happen. So fast forward probably 10 or so years.
What age was it when you went to the gym for the first time? Do you recall?
So it was probably more than 10 years. So I was probably 17, maybe.
Okay.
Because I would go, because my dad would go for practice and stuff, so I'd go in there. And so moved to about 30, I'm sitting on my couch and I'm like, man, shit, I don't like the way that I look. I don't like the way that I feel. And just so happens my brother walks in the door. He's like, hey, it's the weekend. So my gym lets me invite a guest for free on the weekend. And I was like, he said, you want to go? And I said, well, I don't got anything else to do. So I went in there and I remember doing the workout. All I did was use machines. I didn't use free weights at all, and just use machines. And I remember driving home. So my hands on the wheel and my arms are shaking. But I remember thinking, oh man, this is something that I've been missing. Like, I need this in my life. Probably all the dopamine and the endorphin, everything was kicking in. And ever since that moment, man, I said, okay, what does it take to get a membership? I'm going to go. And it just so happened that their one of their most booked trainers also had cerebral palsy.
Oh, wow.
And it was easy to know because we have similar gaits, even if we're different. You can kind of notice those things. And I remember going and I was like, well, that'd be somebody cool to learn from, just because they have a better understanding, even if it's different. They understand some of the stuff that I'm fighting against to make this work. And at that time, he was totally booked. And so I had to use another trainer. But as soon as I got in, I remember the days when I was happy to be working with 30-pound dumbbells, 15-pound dumbbells. And there was at my peak for bench press and dumbbells, I was hitting the 100-pound dumbbell. And
Wow.
I
15 to
remember,
100.
yeah, I remember the day of thinking this 15-pounder was like, this shouldn't be this hard.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
it was just a mindset shift, man. It was just something that I said, boom, okay, this is part of who I am. And then other stuff started happening as I started to go more and more, and I got a deeper purpose into why I was going. I was going for more than just me.
Yeah, I think that the gym, especially with, CP and with people that experience things that affect the neuromuscular system, right? We talked about it before. It's not you versus I need to do this movement. It's can I convince my brain to do this movement, or can I teach my brain how to do this movement? And then I feel like, to recall the same sort of things with me, is that when with the weights, one of the things I think that separates weights and exercise amongst, the therapies and the normal stuff that we go through, is that you're creating a stimulus with the weight, right? And whether you knew it or not, I had no idea when I first went in there. And you either, by putting that weight in your hand and attempting to chest press or do a curl, your brain is learning a new pattern. And because the weight is there, we're creating a stimulus to help rewire some of the stuff. And what happens is, usually, right, the brain isn't wired the right way and things move a different way. And just basic physics, the body is going to take the path of least resistance. So if you have an issue with a joint, if you have a tight muscle, or your brain doesn't articulate a specific muscle or nerve impulse, it's going to move a different way. Well, when you're doing a dumbbell press, right, there's only pretty much one way to do it, or the dumbbell's going to hit you in the face, right? So I think it kind of has a kind of therapeutic, but I can't kind of stress enough how good it is for people with neuromuscular issues, not just CP, to do that, because
Mm-hmm.
it changes you. You go there, just expecting to be there. And like I said, same thing. I didn't want to be there. I thought working out was a disaster when I first went, but you learn how to retrain, and I think it's amazing. Those endorphins start following. You want to press, and there's so many machines and things like that. You figure out the ones that you can use and the things you can do and the things you can't do. We probably deal with a little bit more injuries than the normal person, because
Yeah.
as much, more than I do. You do one thing out of whack, a deadlift or a squat, especially those lower body exercises. Things come apart, but you learn. And, I think it's phenomenal that, that trainer there had that same thing, because, I'm sure he had, a lot more knowledge than everybody else that worked there, because, from your experience going to the gym and mine getting into strength conditioning, when I started as well, I couldn't listen to a regular trainer. I couldn't read your Muscle and Fitness. I couldn't go get your 30-minute booty burner workout off of YouTube. I had to figure out what worked for me, because I was like, well, right away you look at that. Well, I can't do that. Okay, well,
Yeah.
I can't do this, but I know that I need to kind of use, hit these different muscle groups. And then you start to relay of, okay, what do I want to learn how to do, right? Balance on one foot, or shift my weight, or move this arm this way, or move this leg independently. And now you're starting to look up exercises that can help you directly with what kind of pattern you're trying to retrain yourself. So I think it's a fantastic story. And I also, for anybody out there listening with CP, and if you're younger, make sure to start to get involved in that. Find somebody, me or Nathan, reach out. But I don't think there's anything better for somebody that has a neuromuscular issue than getting in the gym, because you're literally going to teach your body how to move properly, and it's the same as training for a sport. You want to get better at soccer, you do certain movements, in the field of strength conditioning, which I'm in, but also with a neuromuscular issue or something going on with motor control, you can also reteach those patterns. So I think that story is fantastic, man, that you were able to go to a gym and it kind of helped you get the endorphins going, and also that you met somebody else that kind of understood what you're going through.
And I think I would say to anybody specifically who has a disability and you have to make those adaptations and those adjustments, like set PRs, set goals that don't set them according to what everybody else is doing. And I'll give you an example. So, I mean, before I started working out, I was 145 pounds. And that was, I could just guarantee 145 pounds. By the time I was done, and I haven't worked out as regularly as I did before COVID and all that stuff. Everything's switched to at home if I am working out. But I moved up to 155 pounds. I increased my weight by 10 pounds. That became my normal set point. And I was basically doing a deadlift or a rack pull. For me, I consider that a deadlift, as it was the closest I was getting for the most part from getting it off the ground. But I got up to 245.
Wow.
And the thing about that, it's not good, but my ego was taking over, like, holy shit, that's badass to be able to do that. I did that on one leg pretty much because of how my hips fire.
Yeah. And no, but like I said, it's all about what you can do. I think you brought it up, set goals, but set goals for yourself, not, everybody around me is deadlifting 315. What can you do in your pattern? You said off of one leg, and so, that's not going to be the norm, but that's fantastic. And I think that's most important. When you start going to the gym, set individualized goals, just so you can track your progress and kind of figure out where you want to go. And like I said, you have to get away from those norms, because it's, a magazine's going to tell you, oh yeah, start at 315, go up to 450. You're not going to do those things, and if I think Nathan brought it up with the ego. If you let that get out of hand, you're going to get hurt, especially if you have, the joints articulate differently, the hips sit differently, you're lifting off of one leg, one arm, whatever issue you have. You have to be careful, because I was the same way, man. 11th grade, I popped my back out because I'm deadlifting 405 with all my boys, and I really shouldn't have been, sniffing that, because you're pushing off of one leg. I have atrophy of the left calf, so I don't drive off my heel. There is no glute activity off the left side. However, my right side is perfectly fine. But when you lift off of one leg with, uneven hips, eventually, the hip's going to give out, and we're going to run into some problems. So I think it's very important to set those goals, also push yourself, but also don't get caught up in, I know you're going to want to, especially, as a teenager with the world of Instagram and everything else, but make sure you're being diligent, because you can hurt yourself, and it does have a lasting effect on you, especially if you have different joint articulations. So why don't we move into how you got involved into the motivating and the mission of becoming an advocate for disability awareness, and just how that's been going.
Yeah, so that I started as the muscle motivator, and I realized that the fitness led to more people paying attention to just me and what I was about. So I treated it like, every time I go somewhere, I've always had this idea and thought in my head that I feel an obligation to show up and be as great as I possibly can, because I feel a sense of responsibility to every other person with a disability. The
Mhm.
fact that I represent somebody's idea of what a disabled person can look like.
Wow,
And
I think that's incredible.
I did not want them to think about this kid on the couch who gets a check and does nothing. Because I think that's a big picture for a lot of people, that they're people that receive Social Security, they receive government assistance, which there's nothing wrong with that.
Mhm.
But that's the expectation I think that the world at large has for a lot of people. And I knew that by doing the work in the gym and then the work with the coaching, I could shift that perception for the people who came in contact with me. And one of the greatest things that I ever did was probably the first kid I worked with. And it just so happened I was in a online forum, a fitness forum, with a top podcast in fitness, and I would post videos, and people would be like, "Oh, how are you doing that? Like, how's that even possible?" And then they do your form is horrible, so you have to tell that whole
Oh,
story.
of course. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm like, yes, I know. The form is my form. Uh, but this kid got introduced to me because I would say, I have cerebral palsy. Here's why my gait or my pattern is the way that it is. And he showed his friend who happened to have cerebral palsy. And he's like, hey, if this guy's doing it, I think you can absolutely do it. Randomly, the kid starts following me on Instagram. I have no idea this interaction has taken place, but I start following him and seeing what he's about. And we work out together for 1 month. I said, hey, man, I'd really like to work with you for a month. No strings attached. You don't have to pay me nothing. I get you're a student, all that stuff. And the first thing his parents are like, is this dude scamming you? Like, what? Do you trust this guy? And the second thing I'll never forget is we did farmer walks. Like I said, you told me you want to increase your grip strength. Let's do farmer walks. And his dad never thought it was possible. And I remember him calling me and being like, I just saw my dad cry because he saw something happen that he never thought was possible.
Mhm.
And that moment will never leave my mind ever, because look, all as a coach, for all the coaches that are out there, like, it isn't about the shit that you say, it's about what you model. Like, all humans do everything off modeling. I didn't have to do shit for that kid. All I would do is go work out. I would make a video of me doing something he wanted to practice so he could see it. And I did a bench press. The next day, he's like, "Oh yeah, so I increased my bench press by 5 pounds," and like, he just took it and ran with it. But people watch what you do. It's not about what you say.
No, I think that's an incredible story, and I think you're correct. It's all about the impact that you leave as a coach, right? It's not about the exercise selection. It's not about even where they go. You know, yes, we want to see everybody succeed, but when you're talking about certain things like that, you know, with injuries and disabilities, I think it's very important. You know, when you're a coach, it's all about the impact. Right. If you're doing, I mean, you know, having the father being emotional, you know, getting the kid to do things that he can't do, I think that is the best and most rewarding thing. You know, I've worked a little bit too with people that have, you know, disabilities or have, you know, kind of issues with, you know, orthopedic stuff and things that they've never thought they'd be able to do, and getting them to do those things, you know, letting them rediscover things that they thought they would never do. I don't think there's anything that's more rewarding. And I think those are things that kind of stay in you, you know, so it's not the kid that you train who bench presses 700 pounds, you know, it's that lasting impact. And I think Nathan makes an amazing point with that wonderful story that, when you coach and when you get into coaching, it's all about the impact, right? That kid is going to remember you for the rest of your life because of how you've changed. And as you said, and, I can see it in your voice and stuff, it radiates with you every day while you do this, and also too, going out and being the best person that you can be, because you feel like you represent the community, and everything that you do, say, or, how you kind of carry yourself makes a big difference. So I think that's awesome, not only for the the community, but also just in general for everybody that's into stuff where other people are involved, and things like that, taking kind of responsibility as a whole, even though you don't really have to.
The funny thing with that is, though, as much as I try and do that on a daily basis, it's so
Mhm.
much outside of the norm
Mhm.
that I get a lot of hate from other people with disabilities because I'm breaking the norm of what they know,
Mhm.
and it's not comfortable. So I would say that's the point in life, is get out of being comfortable, because when we're comfortable, like, you're not going to grow there, you're not going to reach your potential there, and it's just not fun, man.
No, exactly. No, you never want to be comfortable. You never want to end up in that complacency, and I think that anybody, that has an opinion on those things, what you're doing, they need to take a kind of an examination of what they're doing, because as you know, most things, when people project them on you, if you will, there's an issue with them, and it usually has nothing to do with what's going
Mhm.
on with you. So why don't we get into what we touched on a little bit. What would you like to see change in, I guess, the community, the country, in terms of, how people are treated with disabilities? I mean, I know we went over that, but just certain things, like maybe, more access to gyms, or different places that you've seen where maybe if we have more openness, or maybe, different forums and things like that. What would you like to see change in the community, and what kind of things are you working on right now for that?
Well, shit, and in fitness, I think it is just more physical access
Hmm.
to gyms and equipment, and more trainers that like have a specialty with people with disabilities, because right now I would say a lot of people just don't even see gyms as a possibility.
Yeah.
um, the only physical activity I think uh, is therapy, like we talk about
Yeah,
physical
or
therapy
or
and
or the hand
OT.
bikes. Those are big. Every gym has one of those,
Yeah,
just in
yeah.
case. Yeah. No, I completely agree with the gym thing. Yeah, I think there needs to be, somebody of your caliber or mine, and to come in there and actually design. It'd be great to see, design machines based on what you can do with CP. For everybody out there listening, and for you, Nathan, if you want, there's a guy. His name is Mike Borowis. He was my performance director with the Mets. He is one of the first people that I've seen do that. He does a lot of rehab with people with. He started off with people that are paralyzed. There's an E60 out there, 1%. It's an amazing story. He's an amazing person. I mean, I still keep contact, and he kind of changed me when I was around there. But he's pretty much the only person that I've seen that really dives into that, because he does have kids with cerebral palsy, also people that have brain injuries, and different things like that.
Yeah, so I think it's a mindset shift there, that fitness is for everyone. Um, and then, as the community, speaking directly to the people who have disabilities, like, one of the stories that I keep hearing over and over and over is the idea that they're a burden. Like, and I think that comes from a repeated narrative by society that they are a burden. Um, and so I would tell anybody listening right now, if you have a disability, or if you know a family member or a friend who has a disability, like, you're not a burden. They're not a burden. They're a person just like you, just like me. They just have a different circumstance in their life that is showing up for them. And I think that one of the most powerful things that can happen is to have more conversations around disability and using the word disability and not treating it like a bad or a dirty word.
Mhm.
Like there's so much shame that comes with that word, with that label, that it's not necessary, but it's there, it's real. And I think when we say things like handy capable or take the dis out of my ability, I think we're teaching people not to be 100% who they actually are. There's nothing wrong with the disability. It's just a life circumstance.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think, yeah, that kind of stigma, right? I think it should be along the same lines as, tearing your ACL or kind of breaking your wrist, right? This is something that you were born with, right? This is something that you have to deal with. And I don't think if you don't grow up with a disability, you don't really understand the trials and the tribulations that everybody's going through. But also, I think, which is exactly brought up, it's not a dirty word, right? You have a disability. Yes, I have a disability. However, I'm going to do the best that I can to, make the best of everything, to make awareness. And then that's how things get better. Yeah, I think there's still a fear of, oh, well, he has a disability. And then there's that kind of thing also where people try to treat you different a little bit.
Yeah.
And, or they try to protect you when in reality, exactly what you can do and what you can't do, and you'll stop somebody 100% when you're going to get there. Other than that, let you be, let you go and kind of let you do the things that you're able to do, right? But I think
Or you'll be an idiot and you'll push the boundary past what you
yeah,
are able to do like everybody else.
exactly. Or there's that part, exactly. But I think, it doesn't allow for that if you don't give them the initial opportunity to do those things, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of
Mm-hmm.
things I've done, I'm sure you too, that you're not supposed to do, but you're like, well, I'm gonna go do that. But I think that's great. Yeah, I believe the gyms should, to be more accommodating, and they don't have to change the whole thing. I think that's another thing you touched on where it doesn't have to be this is for people with disabilities, right? Just make a normal machine, but say, okay, you can get a wheelchair up to here, or you can do, something else, make it a little bit more accessible and just kind of fit it in a little bit more. It doesn't have to be, and I know you talk about stigmas a lot in your podcast and in your talks. It doesn't have to be a big thing, right? It can be
Mm-hmm.
a little modification to certain things so that somebody with a disability, not even cerebral palsy, whatever it may be, where now you can come in and you can do things normally, because I think that goes through everything, across the line. You just want to be treated normally, right? You don't want it to be, oh, well, he has a disability. How are we going to change what we were originally going to do to include him? Right. But by doing that, it kind of gives you an inferiority complex, but also I think it takes away, as you talked about, opportunities or different things that you should be able to do, because everybody's still kind of afraid, oh, they can't do that. You might hurt yourself. Like I said before, your limitations, where you're going to go. And you're also 100% responsible for what happens.
Yeah, that fear of somebody like suing you for
Mhm.
like, okay, we all signed a waiver when we
Yeah.
signed up to come here. Like, if they don't understand the waiver, then that's a whole complete other issue that doesn't involve the gym, but they signed. Like, I understood the risk of going to the gym. Like, I remember watching a dude tear his pec on the bench press, and I was like, oh, nope.
Oh yeah, I've seen my share. I've seen all of it. Yeah, yeah. Normal people without disabilities just blowing stuff in half. Yeah.
And I think too, one of the biggest things that for people with disabilities, I call it the angry disabled person syndrome.
Hmm.
So if you feel like you should be able to go work out at the gym and it's not currently accessible and you get angry about that, like there's a place for that anger, but I guarantee you that's not going to get an accommodation made for you. Uh, we get to show up and be a model of like who we want to be at our best, And I would say go into your gym, even if you don't have a gym, but you have one that's close. If you want to go to the gym, go into the gym and see what's accessible and actually see where there could be potential opportunity for accommodations that you know because it's workout that you would do, and say, hey, I think that this would be something that you guys could do, and it would potentially bring you a whole lot more revenue. Like, because people forget about that point. We're the largest minority group in the world, and people with disabilities do have a lot of cash, even though people don't see it that way. Like, there's a lot of cash on the table that people leave out when they exclude people with disabilities.
Yeah, no, I think there's always a better way to do that. And you're right, come up with present a problem with a possible solution is always better than here's a problem, you fix it. Or as with most things, business, anything, if you come in with a negative attitude or something like that, usually things aren't going to go well. So you always want to present it in a way, be nice and polite, and most people will be able to kind of accommodate you. So I think that's a good point. If you want to work out, if you're interested in it, you can't hurt to ask. If they say, hey, you can't come in here, now we have a whole nother issue which we can deal with, and of course we don't want. But I also think approaching it in a stern way and kind of being able to open a new opportunity, right? You never know what kind of opportunities will open until you ask. So I think that's something big. So for anybody listening, younger, going through, with a disability or going through some stuff, from your experiences, what advice would you kind of give them? If they want to become kind of an inspiration like yourself, or they want to get into fitness, what would you say? What piece of advice would you give them?
I would say, like, it starts with you first and foremost. Nobody can do it but you. Um, there's this thing that I've recently talked about. I gave 10 pieces of advice for kids with disabilities, and I said, come to the realization that you don't have to be an inspirational speaker, and you sure as hell don't have to go work as a Walmart greeter. Like, I think there are two very extreme ends of what people expect from people with disabilities, and they're those two extremes. You're gonna go be a janitor somewhere, or stand and be the door greeter, or they expect you to be an inspirational speaker. Just because somebody tells you that you're an inspiration, it doesn't mean that you have to go be an inspirational speaker or a motivational speaker, whatever you want to call it. I would say spend as much time as you can developing skills around your ability to communicate with other people, develop skills around emotional intelligence, understanding your emotions and how they impact you, and don't worry about all this is the path, because I'll tell you where the path gets you. Like, 2008, graduated college. We got hit with the recession. Like, everybody was getting smacked in the face. I'd done all the stuff I was supposed to do. I had completed the path. And then all these people kept telling me, no, you can't have a job. You can't have a job. And I was like, well, what did I do? Like, this is what I was supposed to do. I'm supposed to get a job, and now I'm going to go get a house, get married, all this other shit. And then life is like, no, that's not how that works for you. And that's kind of the thing, is your path is your path. It's not going to look like what people tell you it's supposed to look like. You get to work on yourself. As long as you work on yourself, I believe that stuff is going to work out. You can't change anybody else. You can't necessarily If other people are dependent upon you for their happiness, I would evaluate being in a relationship like that, because you can't be somebody else's happiness. So I would just say work on you, and the path will figure itself out.
Absolutely. We're all on a path. We're on our own path, not compared to anybody else's, regardless of where you are. And also, working on yourself is the most important thing. And the more you work on yourself, and the more you show compassion and kindness and everything else, everything will work out. There is no set path, and there is no set blueprint. Although we'd all love to have that there. So last point I just want to go through, because we talked about before the show, talk a little bit about what you're doing now with the preschools, and then we'll just touch on where people can reach you if they want to ask you more questions and get in touch with you.
Yeah, man. So what I'm up to now is I help a lot of, outside of the preschool, I help people who are lonely, right? I help people get rid of their loneliness so they can find connection in their life and be seen and heard. But with the preschools, what I do is I help early intervention programs who have children with disabilities figure out ways to make their programs inclusive to help eliminate the suspension or the expulsion of children with disabilities, because there's a very high rate for kids with disabilities who get expelled. And again, I mean, that goes back to the narrative, right? Of when people don't understand something and there's a fear there, it's much easier to avoid it than to kind of work together to figure out how to solve a problem. That's why people, when they see their kids stare, they're like, don't stare, don't ask a question, because there's a fear there that's existed for a long time. So I hope, I'm brand new to this, so one of my hopes is to help eradicate some of that fear so that even kids before they start school, they can have some of that self-love, that self-kindness, to see themselves as the perfectly imperfect human that they are, and not that normal stereotype of you're a bad kid because you have this thing. I hope that's something that comes out of my work here.
Well, I'm sure that that is something that's going to happen, and I think that's something that needs to happen. And I think it's great that you're taking the steps to do that, because if you eliminate that kind of thing where you're initially separating somebody with a disability from the general public, or from the general, the class, if you will, you're going to create animosity. And I think that's where some of that bullying and aggression comes with. So if we can get rid of that, right, obviously the suspension will go down. And as we talked about the whole time, the more inclusion we can, in effect put out there, and the closer we can get everybody together in the same kind of group, without labels, without, having differences. And also, I think you touched on it, being afraid to ask questions. I'm sure you've gone through it as I did a little bit when I was younger. I would rather people just ask me questions. Don't, a lot of the stuff, don't stare or point, just ask a question. And, as I've gotten older, I have no problems. I'll sit you down and give you a 25-minute, lesson on what everything is. But, I think that's still something that has to be done. But also, what you're doing there is fantastic, breaking those labels, and also, helping those children at a young age, get rid of the labels, and also, be kind of inclusive, because I'm sure that's going to have an amazing impact for them as they grow up, and also help them, with better lives, and kind of avoid certain things, and also get more opportunities if we can get those, suspensions down in those inclusion programs.
And it's interesting. The thing about questions, right? I would offer this to anybody who, if you see somebody with a disability like you're out and about, whatever that looks like for you right now specifically, and you're like, you reach that point where you would normally have a conversation with that person if they didn't have a disability. Ask yourself, why? What's the fear behind me having this conversation with this person that stands in front of me right now? Like, so if you came up to me and I didn't have a disability, like you didn't know I had a disability, what would you ask me? Okay, ask that shit and you'll figure out the rest. If somebody has an intellectual disability, you'll figure that out. But you never know until you talk to somebody. And even if they do, figure out how to talk to them on their level.
Yep, exactly. No questions are bad questions, and if you don't ask, you'll kind of never figure that out. So, always ask questions and never, as you said, never put judgment or labels on anybody because you never know A, what they've gone through, or B, what they can offer. Just because somebody has a disability or something doesn't mean that they can't give you some important information or maybe life-changing information. So Nathan, for anybody that wants to reach you, get a hold of you, ask questions, join your program with no labels, become part of your community you have there. What is the best way to reach you, and how do they get in contact with you?
Yeah, two ways. Instagram. So Instagram, I'm at the real Nathan Todd, and then over on Facebook, the loneliness coach. That's where you can find me.
Okay, perfect. I will put that on that Instagram handle for everybody listening that wants to get in touch with him on the podcast Instagram, along with the when I do the promotions. Nathan, man, I'm so happy you came on. I love the conversation. I'm happy we could have this conversation, and I'm just thankful that you came on, man. And I really loved all the stuff and all the stuff you're doing to kind of eradicate those labels and kind of raise awareness for those with disabilities, man. Thank you so much for coming on.
I appreciate it, man.
Thank you.